Alright guys, I know it's been a few days, but I'm back. I'm going to try and explain to you some simple things about the editable poly rollout. Now the editable poly rollout is the primary rollout that you're going to be using for box modeling, or just, modeling off of primitives in 3ds Max. And that's primarily because it has the most options. I'm going to be using 3ds Max 9. Now, for those of you who are modding Battlefield 1942, you probably won't have all the options I'm going to show you today. I do believe that there are some of them that are not in 3ds Max 7 or 8 that are in 3ds Max 9. And as we all know, the Battlefield 1942 mod tools do not work too well with 3ds Max 9. So, just keep that in mind. For those of you who are modding Battlefield 2, you should have most of these options depending on which versions of 3ds Max you're using, whether it's 9 if you manage to get 10 to work, or any of the student versions with the dates. So let's just get started. I'm in a blank scene for 3ds Max. And one thing that I wanted to show you real quickly before I get started, because I forgot to mention this in the beginner tutorial, and I thought this was pretty important. You can change the viewport to whatever you want just by right-clicking on the name, going to Views, and then picking the appropriate view that you want. So for instance, I could change this from perspective to front, or from front back to perspective. It's not really a big deal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just start off with a normal box. And I'm not going to be actually attempting to model anything here. In the future, I will embark on creating a weapon for Battlefield 2, and we will go through the process of modeling a weapon if I can do it. I mean, I can't promise that my weapon is going to be that amazing looking, but we will go through that process, and I will show you the things that you need to do to get a good looking working weapon in Battlefield 2. So now that I've got my box, actually before we do that, I gotta show you one more thing before we start working. And this is important when you're going to start using and creating objects, is you want to set up your units, which adjusts the scale for Battlefield 2. Now Battlefield 2 uses the metric system, and if we click on Customize and we go to Unit Setup, and then we highlight the metric box here, then we go System Unit Setup, and you want to make sure that this is set to 0.1 meters. If it's not set to 0.1 meters, it is not in Battlefield 2 scale. Alright, so let's go ahead and make that box again. So there's my box. What I'm going to do to try to make it into an editable poly is I'm going to right click on this box to bring up the shortcut menu. I'm going to go to Convert To, I'm going to go to Convert Editable Poly. So now over here you'll see that we have the editable poly rollout on the side. It'll come up and it'll have a bunch of different options. The first things that you need to know are the selection types. There's selections by vertices, which are points that are created by intersecting edges. And a way to see those and to see edges on your object is to hit F4 to bring up the visible edges. And once I click on vertices, you're going to see some blue dots that show up on the corners, and you can click on those blue dots. The next one is edges, which is self-explanatory. Those are the edges that are on the sides. Then don't worry about border, or you might want to use element, but don't worry about border for now. And there's polygon, which is an entire face itself, and of course there's element, which is a series of polygons, or series of polygons that create a single object. So what these selection things do is they allow you to move individual items on this mesh so that you can create interesting shapes. You're seeing here that I have a vertice selected, and I can move it just like as if I was moving an object by using the gizmo and doing whatever I want to do with it. And the same thing applies for all of these selections. I can move an edge back and forth, maybe to create a rhombus. I can move a face up and down or side to side. And of course, with the element, you can move the boxes. And I'll show you more about what the element really means. It's basically a way to move around a pivot, but I'm not going to go too much into element right now. So those are the simple selection things, and you're going to want to know those. Now, one of the important things when selecting, especially with complex objects, is that 3ds Max likes to select vertices or something that's not in your view. So like if you see, I'll drag this selection box in the direction of that invisible vertex that's behind the box that creates that final corner, and it'll actually select that vertex. And it likes to do that a lot to you when you're working with models that have a lot of faces and vertices, and it's really annoying sometimes. So that's why they created this button here. It says ignore backfacing. And what ignore backfacing does is it will not allow me to select anything that's not in front of me. So for instance, I can't select any of those rear faces. I can only select faces that I'm looking at, only vertices that are visible to the camera, and only edges that I can actually see. This is a very helpful tool when you're going to 3D model, because you will find there are many moments where you are annoyingly selecting a face or an edge or a vertice that you don't want to select. Alright, now we have the remove tool. Now the remove tool is pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to actually use the remove tool to show you a couple of different tools. The first tool I'm going to show you is the connect tool. Now the connect tool creates an edge between 2 points that you specify. I've selected 2 edges on the top of the box, and I'm now going to connect them to create a third edge which goes through the middle of that face. So now you will see there's an edge that goes through the middle of that face, and we have actually created 2 faces out of the top of the box. And if I wanted to move this up, I could of course create a far distant house that maybe I was going to use for some scenery in the background that's not very detailed. Now the remove tool allows us to get rid of things that we don't necessarily want. So let's say we didn't actually want this. Let's say we were working with an object and it had a lot of vertices in it, and we were cleaning this object up for export. We wanted to make sure that it had the least amount of polygons that it could. Now when you export something, it triangulates. And what I mean by triangulate is when every square box, because the Battlefield engines only deal with triangles, so every square box, everything you see is going to be bisected by a triangle. So for instance, I'll just show you what I mean by using the connect tool, which is pretty similar to which is the same for connect tool that we just used, but this time I'll be doing it with vertices. And if I click on the vertice of this line and this corner and I hit connect, it'll actually make a line between those two. Now these 2 triangles here is what this would look like exported. Now this connect tool is very useful when you're modeling, because there are going to be times when you need extra vertices or extra definition to a corner or something like that, and using the connect tool is a very good way to get that extra definition. And if you're doing a very complex model, it's always worth it to if you're doing something that has some awkward curves to it, turn off the edged faces for a little while and just look at it without it to get a better idea of what it's going to look like when you export it. But now that I've explained the connect tool, let's get rid of those faces. Now, a lot of people think, oh, we have to delete them. No, we don't have to delete them. We can, but that means we have to use another tool to recreate them. So instead, let's just use the remove tool. Now there's a shortcut for the remove tool, and it's backspace. When you select a vertice or an edge that you want to get rid of, you simply hit backspace and it'll get rid of it. Now you have to be aware when you delete edges, because edges, if you use the remove tool, will actually leave leftover vertices. So you have to go back and you have to look for those. For instance, I have 2 vertices of that center line that I created that are sitting here. And the problem with these 2 vertices is that they're not connected by an edge, which means they create very awkward faces if they're still in the mesh. And they will triangulate very strangely. So I want to get rid of these 2 vertices as well. And now that face is back to its original settings.